Well, let me just give a bit of history about how I got to where I am today, being the baddie, probably the biggest baddie in the clan. Um, I kind of did things a very hard way. I didn't platoon. I wasn't in a clan, and I played almost every tank grinding from the ground up. For some stupid reason, I thought that was the smart thing to do. Wasn't really, but at the same time, I learned a lot about all the different tanks, and I guess it kind of works, but also it's tough. It's tough um, mentally actually. But the point is, that there wasn't some shortcut that I took to get to a certain level of stats. I was never actually really bad at the game. I think the worst I was probably around 48% and probably about 800 efficiency. But at some point, I think around 1700 games, I actually started giving a shit about stats, or at least figuring out that stats meant something. And I tried to improve them, but I had no idea what I was doing. And it took, I mean, thousands of games for me to just learn something new. And I didn't see myself as really bad. I didn't realize there were people who were really good. I just thought there were people who might be a little bit better than me. Um, I didn't have XVM at the time. I had no clue what was really or what I really should be doing to improve those stats. I just know at the time I wanted to improve them. So, but over time, I started figuring certain things out. Again, I did it the hard way because really there's a lot of trial and error on my part because I wasn't platooning. I was on the forum trying to read up on certain things, but I really didn't understand what I was reading. So um, I did things, I guess you call it the hard way, and really, at this stage, I would say, if you can help it, probably there isn't a need to do that. Um, so right now with K-Bear and G-Bear having certain stat requirements for new recruits, obviously 60-day win 7 is the key metric. Obviously most of you know that I have the my what stat site, and I have an implementation of the calculation for win 7 on the site. So like it or not, I know what goes into those numbers. Um, Now, there's definitely a lot of people out there who thinks that these numbers can be padded. These numbers, they're just numbers, what have you. But really, at the end of the day, there's definitely a correlation between those numbers and the ability of the tanker. Up to a certain point, you can say perhaps things can be padded, but I mean, with all due respect, if you have, let's say, 1,000 win 7, you should not be complaining about how it's made up or what components go in, because I don't think you really understand what it takes to get to, let's say, 2,000. Um, so, if it's easy to go and take a look at the formula itself, there's obviously certain things that make up the number. And from my experience, it's really not easy to pad it. There are certain things that I suppose you can do to kind of help, but there definitely needs to be a lot of skill to go along with it. Some people will complain about things like cap reset, and some people complain about kills. Maybe some even complain about suicide scouting, upping the spotting numbers. But when you actually think about it, if you focus on just one piece of that formula, chances are it's going to affect the number overall. Because if you're going to be sitting back, and waiting for someone to cap so that you can reset, chances are you're not going to do that much damage. Chances are you aren't going to get that many kills. I mean, suppose you could get a few games where you're finishing off people at the end of the battle, but that's going to significantly affect your win rate. So it isn't easy to just pad it, and chances are if someone's padding it, they're pretty damn good. Now, from my experience, if you really want to improve Win 7, what you got to do is you got to be decent across the board. Personally, I don't focus on any one particular stat, with perhaps the exception of damage, and I'll kind of get into that. But I really don't focus on any of the other stats, because really, like I said, if you tend to just focus on one, there's a very good chance that you're going to affect some of your other numbers. So now damage, I believe, is something very different, because if you can have high damage output, that just significantly improves your chance or your team's chance of winning. So I think that's definitely one thing in that formula that is probably more important than anything else. So if you really want to improve your Win 7 number, I would suggest, out of all those components, to try to improve your damage number. A lot of guys that I play with understand this. Like guys like Dragon, I would say he's completely nuts about damage. In some cases, I would say maybe people focus on it a little too much. But one thing I think that you can try to do it, but at some point, I think probably around 1700, then you probably will start to understand that you got to let it flow. Okay, what that means is you have to kind of, you can't chase it, because I find from my experience that if you chase it, you tend to actually do worse, and you also tend to die a lot, and that negatively affects certain aspects of your stats as well. Para actually on the forums said something about KD, kill versus death, and Dirk mentioned that a lot when we're tuning. The thing is, that actually is not a value that really goes into the Win 7 calculation. Kills obviously does, but your survival number doesn't. So, but then again, from actual experience, if anybody actually try to keep track of their Win 7, they'll notice that as their survival rate goes up, their Win 7 tends to also go up. And really, this is a consequence of a very key, I guess, part of playing this game, which is survival. You can't improve your numbers if you're dying early. Okay, in fact, I would say you can't improve your numbers if you're not the last one to die in most battles. So in this discussion, I think that's probably the one thing I really want to focus on, because I think for a lot of people, they can probably, through experience, after a certain number of battles, and probably from playing with some half-decent players, they will probably start to fluctuate around 51 to maybe 53% win rate, and maybe even as high as 1400 Win 7. But they tend to stall around there. And I think one of the main reasons why they stall there is because they cannot survive in battle. They have no control over that. It's just a matter of more to do with luck and the teams they get, and basically like matchmaking, what have you. And obviously all those things are factors. I mean, that's the reality of it. But at the same time, I would say that if you actually get to understand what it means to really stay alive, you will begin to appreciate that you have control over it. There are a lot of times, especially I recall those days when I used to die early in game and get all frustrated. There's a lot of things, if you think carefully about it, that you probably had at least a second where you could have asked yourself, is this move really worth it? And a lot of times the answer is no, but you did it anyways. And I'm sure we have all done that, but that is something that with practice becomes more instinctive, where you spend that fraction of a second asking yourself that question. There are times I find personally where things outside of the game, work or whatever, it kind of that stress sometimes affects that decision making. But the thing you really need to do is always get to that state where you're asking yourself that question. Now, there are times where you say, fuck it, because I had a bad day, I'm going to just charge anyways. But if you're asking that question, okay, there's a very good chance in most battles, you're probably going to be fairly calm, and you ask that question is going to save you, from dying early. It's not something that, I think for a lot of players, they can do. But it's something that you definitely need to practice doing. You have to value your hit points. No matter what tank you have, how good or how bad it is, the most valuable thing you have on it is not your gun, is your hit points. You have to use it because, again, if you want to improve your stats, you got to get in the fight. If you're not in the fight, your stats will suck. So if you're going to get in the fight, that means you have to expend your hit points. I'm not a big fan of sitting back and sniping. Those who platoon with me probably will know this. But at the same time, you gotta expend those hit points wisely. Trading is generally a really bad idea. So you gotta get it in your head. Don't trade. So I see a lot of guys trading for some strange reason. If you ever see me do it, it's because I have done a certain amount of calculation about the guy that I'm trading with. So if you know that you're gonna come out ahead, really far ahead, then I would say go trade. If you don't think you're gonna come out ahead, probably back off. If you know you're not gonna come out ahead, then just don't do it. Because there's really no good reason for it. Because if you want to improve your stats, you have to carry. And if you're gonna carry in battle, that does not mean you take out the tank that's in front of you. Pretty much you have to take out, the majority of their team. Well, at least that's the way you have to think about it. So, again, it goes back to not trading. Because if you're trading, even if you win, chances are you're only going to take that one tank out, because you're probably going to get damage, and then after that one tank, you're not going to be of much use. So try to avoid trading. Obviously certain tanks are good at peeking and poking, but even then you have to make sure that you're putting yourself in a position where you're not just trading shot for shot. Okay, you have to somehow find a way, okay, to give yourself that advantage. If you're not going to have the advantage, it's better to back up. Now, it isn't something that's easy to do. It takes a lot of time for that to happen. But you have to definitely keep asking yourself that question about whether something is worth it. But you also have to know when to ask that question. I've been in certain clan battles recently where I'm not going to name any names, but I've noticed some people charging when basically they're surrounded. Now, I gotta say that in clan war sometimes it's difficult, because if you're given an instruction to go, you pretty much have to go. But there always should be a moment where there should be a bit of a pause. And I find that from what I've seen, sometimes I don't think people have that. No one's perfect. You're gonna probably get that one time where you're gonna derp it, and I'm sure the guys I platoon with regularly will remember exactly what I'm talking about when I went and derped it. But also I'm pretty sure that they'll tell you that they remember those moments well, because it doesn't happen very often. So that's one of the key things, obviously. Something else that's also very key to improving your stats is map awareness. Again, you cannot improve your stats if you're not getting involved in the fight. You have to get involved. This is something that you know, definitely players who are not very good will obviously not understand this, but even certain players who are decent stat wise, in my opinion, they really are missing the point um, of most of the battle as far as how they approach it on certain maps in certain modes. I mean, obviously, if you have Lakeville encounter, everybody that's half decent will know not to go valley, and they're gonna go to the town. But sometimes it's not something as obvious as that. But the key thing again, number one thing is you have to get in the fight. Okay, getting in the fight doesn't mean charging head first into the battle. Okay, it means that you are putting yourself in a position where you can do something. You have to do something smart, but you have to, you have the ability to do something. So if you're on a map where there's a side, okay, that's essentially away from where typically the battle happens, okay, there's a very good chance you're going to be useless, because chances are, the rest of your team are going to get destroyed before you can get in the fight. Okay, some people will say, well, I'm trying to flank. Well, in my opinion, flanking is not going all the way around a map to try to get to the enemy, because if you do that, by the time you get there, pretty much nothing useful is going to happen. For me, flanking is more about getting into fight, but not to actually jump in directly, but find another approach where the enemy is not ready for you. For me, that's flanking. So if you're on a map, again, if you're going out into a field where 99% of the time the fight is in the town, okay, and your approach basically is completely visible, for 4 squares. Basically anybody just by accident probably spot you, and then they can turn the turrets, like probably have 3 guns on you. That's stupid. I've seen it all the time, and people will try to explain why that's a good idea, but as far as I'm concerned, that you're not going to improve your stats or your results that way, because you're not in the fight. And that's one of those things that I think when it comes to skill, for example, how to angle your tank, learning weak spots, I mean, all those things are good, but those things are things that take a lot of time. But as far as maps go, and where you should go and what you should do in certain tanks, actually, it is something that I think you should be able to pick up very quickly if you actually pay attention. I find if you're, let's say, go to the forums, there's a lot of debate on what people should do on certain maps. For example, there's a huge thread there about the valley and Lakeville. Well, this is my thought on it. If you are an average or a bad player, and you go to a spot in the map, okay, every time you're there, you see guys like purple guys go there and they whip your ass, okay, what that should tell you is that that's the right place to be, because those guys who are good, they're going there. If you're getting your ass handed to you, you learn how to hand their asses to them, but that's the right place to be. So if you're going somewhere where they're not, then chances are that's not where they are. But unfortunately for some people, they don't understand that concept. They think, well, all these guys are going here, so if I go somewhere else, they're not going to be able to kill me, and I'm going to be able to flank them or whatever. But the point is, there's a reason why the good guys go to certain spots, and really that's where you should be, because that's where the fight is, and that's how you get into the fight. As far as the fine point of what you should do once you're in the general vicinity, those are kind of things that's harder to get to, and you have to kind of work on it. But if you're basically stuck around 51 to 53%, that's something that should significantly improve your results pretty quickly. Just focus on seeing where people are going and trying to get some idea why they're going there, okay, and try it. Go there, and just because if you go there you don't get good results, it doesn't mean that that's not the spot to be, because again, if all the good players are going there, there's a very good chance that's where you should be. And as far as tactics go, I think in this game there really isn't really that much variety as far as how you should, play certain tanks and certain maps. I mean, Clan Wars, for example, there really aren't that many strats, and in different, but still, I don't think there's really that much variety. I think good players understand this concept, and what they're trying to do is actually polish their skill. So they're not trying to come up with some really funky way of winning a battle. They probably do the same stuff, maybe there's a couple of varieties, but they're doing the same stuff more or less every single time, but they're just trying to improve on how well they do it. And I find that, the guys who are not so good, they're probably thinking, I'm going to show them that I'm smarter than them. I'm gonna drive my low up the hill on Himmelsdorf. Then I'm gonna go flank those guys and show them and surprise them. Well, improving your stats pretty much is about playing the percentages. So if you're doing stuff that everybody knows is successful, then chances are you're going to be successful. If you're doing stuff that basically nobody's doing, because they know it's going to work 1 out of 10 times, well, that's not going to help you, because even if you get it to work 1 out of 10 times, you're only at 10%. So now coming back to stats and improving them, again, I don't, well, I think, I kind of did things the hard way up to a certain point. I definitely don't recommend it doing it that way. Platooning is definitely the best thing you can do as far as improving your stats. But as has been said before, platooning is a skill multiplier. Okay, so if you're good, you platoon with some other good players, you're going to get better results. But if you're not very good, you platoon with players that are not good, you're going to get really bad results. You might as well just solo it. So, but at the same time, the reality is there's not going to be a lot of good players that want to platoon with you if you're not good. Okay. So, but at the very least, I think that you can do for yourself is to at least improve your chances of being invited to platoon with good players. And what good players tend to do, I guess this is what some people call stat padding, is to try to improve their odds every single battle, okay, before they hit the battle button. They do that by playing tanks with preferential matchmaking. Okay, they choose the best tank selection possible to give them the best chance of winning. They shoot go rounds, and I think that basically, those are things that you should be doing. There's no reason to gimp yourself. There's no reason at all. There's no difference. Then why would you ever want to play with a 50% crew? There's no reason for that. So so one of the first things I really would recommend for people to do, if you want to improve your stats, is go buy a tank with preferential matchmaking if you don't have one already. Okay. Tier 5 is okay. Tier 8 is the best. Okay. But that being said, not all of them are equal. I think from my own perspective, I think they're all decent, but you might not see it that way. So, but I would recommend, if you don't have one already, when the 8.8 comes out, get yourself the Chinese Heavy 112, because that thing has preferential matchmaking, and in a lot of ways it's more friendly tank to use than the IS-6. And get one of those tanks and load up gold. Okay. when you do that, if you have a platoon of 3, there's a very good chance you're going to be on top in the matchmaking. And after that, you go out there and do plenty of damage. You try to focus on doing as much damage output as possible, and you need to also learn to work together to maximize that damage output. Now, we don't always, when I platoon, we don't always play the tier 8 preferential tanks. I would say we do that a lot, but at the same time we have other tanks to grind, so we don't always play those tanks. But the worst thing you can do though is to just grab a bunch of tanks at the same tier and just say, oh, let's get in battle. Tank makeup is very important. If you have 3 tanks, that's already a fairly big part of a team. So for example, if you bring 3 TDs and y'all decide to sit back, if you happen to land on top tier in the battle, and there's only 3 of you in that tier, and they have 3 heavies, well, guess what? You're going to be sitting back while the heavies are smashing the shit out of the rest of your team, right? So you have to really think about that. I wouldn't say that there's a specific makeup that works, but you have to give it a little bit of variety. Try to get something with a little bit of speed so that you can go back if you need to get back to the cap. And I always like to have some weight, okay, because like I said, heavies are very important in battles because they have the ability to smash the other team. If you're a top tier heavy and you find yourself on a map where you have basically the other team's lower tiers, there's a very good chance you can just go and crush them, right? So that's why I would always try to at least have 1 heavy in the platoon. I'm not necessarily a big fan of TDs because I obviously I think that a lot of times you kind of have to play them as a sniper in the back, and again I'm not a big fan of that. But if you do bring a TD, I definitely would say don't bring more than 1 if you want to maximize your chance of winning. But sometimes you need to grind. You just need to grind. But I'm just saying that if you're looking to improve your stats, you want to improve your win rate, you want to maximize, tank makeup is very important when you're platooning. As far as speed, that's a very key part of platooning and also in the game. I know that a lot of times we hate seeing lemming rushes, and that's probably in pubs. That's one of those things that annoy people more than anything. I used to be the guy that would always go to the other side of the map because I think that, well, I'm gonna hold here while those idiots go and lemming that way. So that never worked out. Usually I end up dying. The chance of winning is usually not any better by me holding that other side. So I tend not to do that anymore. Sometimes I do under certain situations because for whatever reason I might think there's some just cause for it, but in most cases what I try to do is turn the lemming rush into a strong push. So what you do is you take your tank and you go ahead of everybody and you lead the charge. Now that being said, we all have to know our own capabilities and whether that's realistic or not. But if you think you can, then probably that's a good idea, because a lot of times in pubs, those guys doing the lemming, well, basically once they hit the first resistance, they're all going to stop, right? And that's when the other side usually will fall, because all those tanks are sitting there, they're not doing shit, while the other side, well, that's it. So nowadays, what I tend to do is, if I see a big force going one way, there's a very good chance I'm going to go join them, and I'm going to lead that push. in most cases, I can, help get that push to succeed. But this is where, speed is very important in the game, because just because you're leading the push does not mean that you should follow it through. A lot of times you shouldn't actually see it through. Basically, you need to lead it so that the puppies will follow you and help you try to crush the enemy. But up to a certain point, if you're having success, you got to start watching that mini map and start thinking, when should I be going back? Because if you have that sort of a push going, there's a very good chance another flank's gonna fall. Okay, if everything happens right, or even in a lot of cases when it doesn't happen right, if you go back early enough, and you do it in a smart way, not to simply run right into the enemy, but in a lot of cases it's more about cap resetting. So you go find a good position where probably the enemy is not expecting you. Okay, so because at that point they probably they may have encountered some resistance, or they may not have, but they probably don't think that someone's back there, and they wouldn't even know where you are in a lot of cases. So you just basically wait for them to get near and try to reset. Now you gotta kind of play it smart, because if they have big enough of force, your one tank with your reload, no matter how fast it is, might not be able to do enough to reset. So you might have to kind of try to slow them down beforehand. But I think that's a very critical part to winning, and also that's where every so often you can start bumping up your numbers by upping your base defense numbers. I'm definitely, I would never suggest trying to buff that number on purpose, but that's the kind of scenario where you can. So basically, if you're going and leading a flank, you're crushing tanks, there's a very good chance you're really doing good damage. You probably got yourself one or maybe 2 kills. You're going back and you're ready to reset. You get some cap resets. Maybe you can get even another kill or 2, and definitely you're gonna get some more damage. And then that's where you see those win 7 numbers just skyrocket. Okay, but that's not just about the numbers. I mean, to me, right now where I am, that is the way to play the game. Okay, so if you want one very general strategy, that would be it. Okay, it kind of goes along with my view of not sitting back. If you are in a platoon, I mean, if you have one guy sitting back, it isn't the end of the world. But generally, I think people who platoon with me know that I get kind of annoyed if they do, because I really do believe that if you take that 1 or 2 tank that's sitting back and you add it to a push, you're basically going to screw the enemy up. That's a lot better than sitting back and waiting to see whether they mess up the rest of your team or not before you start doing something. So that's generally something that I find, especially recently, that's really helped. Now, these are kind of the general things, very general things that I thought of as far as this session. There's definitely a lot more to the game than that, but those other things are much more specific. You probably in the future, probably I'll set up like a training room where we can look at some of these very specific aspects. You may call them like a skill, but these are kind of things that maybe in the future we'll get in a training room, and then I'll show you guys certain things, and then we can kind of try it out right there, and or when you're actually in battle in pubs, some of these things you can start working on, and those are the kind of things that you really need a lot more practice. Like most of the stuff I mentioned so far tonight, I mean, it's not necessarily practice, it's more about just if you haven't been looking at things a certain way, or you haven't thought of it that way, I just wanted to kind of get you thinking that way. But there's a lot of other stuff that you'll need actual practice, and that's where we'll probably get into the training room. And some of these things, just a preview. For example, if anybody's play with me in platoon when I'm playing my Type 59, they might have seen me do some pretty nasty damage to the enemy while I'm driving backwards. Knowing your tanks obviously is very important in this game. There are some tanks that are phenomenally agile when they're going backwards, and when you're doing that, the enemy a lot of times they think you're running and they're not afraid of you, or they might not even really know what to do with you. All they're doing is just trying to zoom in on you. But if you know how to drive backwards in a really agile way, sometimes they just don't have the ability to hit you because you're moving all over the place. You can really angle your tank in a certain way, and you're still hitting them. So sometimes that can be pretty neat. And those are kind of like things that you have to definitely practice. We can probably try some of those. I know a lot of people talk about weak spots and how to figure out where to hit tanks. I wouldn't say I know all the weak spots of every single tank. My approach generally is to hit the fairly generic spots, and there are obviously, for example, lower front plate for most tanks is an obvious weak spot that you should aim for. But that may not always be the case depending on where you are as far as elevation, or in some cases angle. In some cases also how that armor is made up. But generally, if you are not familiar with all the weak spots, and either you don't want to or you don't have the time to figure all of them out, I would suggest just do it by trial and error. At least learn the pretty generic weak spots and just go for them for every single tank. If it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't, then try another one. And eventually you'll figure it out. Most people have a few thousand games or 10,000 games or more. So in that time, I think you should be able to figure it out. But I find if you're kind of sitting there and just moving your your gun around trying to find a specific weak spot and you just can't find it and they're killing you, that doesn't really help. So, but at the same time, one of those things we can try working on is actually preparing the shot before you actually have it. What that means is when you see a tank in front of you, you know they're there, but they're not on you yet, or you're not on them yet. But what you can do is actually based on what you can see of their outline. In a lot of cases, you already know before you engage them generally which way they're pointing, where their gun is. Pretty much you should have an idea exactly what you're facing. Don't aim your gun at the moment when you have a real shot, because by then there's a delay, because chances are at that point they also have a shot on you. Right? In this game is all getting that first shot in is critical. So what you should do is, before you actually get to a point where you have that shot, okay, you should work on preparing that shot so that you already have your gun pretty much near the spot that you want to shoot. So for example, if the guy is literally dead straight on in front of you, okay, and basically the best spot to shoot him is his lower front plate. Before you have that shot, mentally you should be saying to yourself, lower front plate, okay, and then you focus on that. Okay, sometimes it doesn't work out, okay, for whatever reason, okay, but in most cases that's what you should be doing. That's one of those things that at this point I would say it's very much subconscious for me. I don't really think about it, but recently when I started thinking about if I was to teach somebody something, basically I'm thinking about what I'm doing. So that's one of those things that I find now comes very natural to me. So for example, if I have an E75 in front of me, okay, and he's angled in a funny way. You know, I don't really need to think about it. My gun is pretty near a spot where it's close to his cupola. Okay, it's just instinctive. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you have to work on. Okay, um, again, if you don't know the exact weak spots, that's fine. Just go for the generic ones for now. Okay, in a lot of cases, it'll work. Um, it's probably going to give you a better chance anyways than to just kind of fumble around trying to figure out, oh, where should I shoot him, right? Sometimes, trying that and with a little bit of trial and error, if you don't figure it out one game, maybe you'll figure it out in two. But anyways, that's the kind of thing that we'll probably need to work on in a training room session. Something else I also wanna do is get into like close combat formation. I think that that's one of those things that really annoys me when I'm platooning. Sometimes you're focused on the action and bad things happen, and we all shot somebody on our team by accident, whether it's their fault or ours. It happens, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is, like, for example, if you're on Al Haluf and you're in the grinder, the A2 area, and you're on a heavy, some people will say don't go there if they have arty. Like I said, you got to go where the fight is, especially in pubs. So if you're actually there and you're there with, let's say, a couple of your platoon mates, the worst thing you can do is basically stall each other. Okay, either getting each other's way or grinding each other's tracks. Okay, so there's definitely a certain amount of technique and a certain amount of familiarity with the other players, but there are people who have no clue how to do that, and that's what really frustrates me. And that's something that I think that people should work on. And if you're going to platoon with people, that's very important. Because a lot of times, if you have, let's say, tank a platoon of 3, and you have 3 guns on one enemy, if you know how to hit that guy in 3 successive shots, okay, there's a very good chance you're going to take them out in probably a couple of reloads at most. Okay, but if you're fumbling around, okay, then what you're doing is basically, instead of getting in 3 possible shots, maybe you're only getting 1. Okay, so when you have, let's say, if you're 3 on 1, that guy has 1 shot on the 3 of you, but you only be able to take 1 shot on him because you're mucking around and getting each other away. Basically, you're useless. Okay, you might as well not be platooning. Okay, so that's something that definitely I think that people should work on, because otherwise I think platooning is not going to help you that much. It might help to kind of cover the map, and at least people are not completely brain dead, but you can do so much more if you have the ability to kind of figure out how to get in those shots without getting each other's way. So I think as far as my mumbling, I think I'm probably done for now. I'm going to probably take some questions. I see there's already some question, so let me take a look. Arty, I really don't have any idea because I don't play Arty, but I would say in general probably it isn't good because especially right now after the nerf, because there's just so many components of the Win 7 formula that you really can't do much about. I suppose in some cases, especially like on encounter, if you have an arty that just keep hitting cap, but overall I would say it's probably unless you're really good, I'm just saying generally speaking, I don't think so. I would say obviously mediums and heavies are probably the best for Win 7. TDs probably not as much because they sit back, and that affects some spotting numbers. But generally, I would say Artie's probably not the best.
Okay, let's say your everyone's going one side and nobody's going a side that people would usually go. Which side would you go?
I touched on it. I said I'm gonna go with the push.
Okay.
Go with the push. Okay, you gotta. If you're gonna carry, that means you're gonna carry. That means carrying generally does not mean sitting back and sniping. Okay, because in most cases, if you do that, basically the team is dead, and how fast can you shoot? So basically, you try to lead the charge. If you're not a heavy, you just gotta do it in a smarter way, I guess. But you still gotta try to be there. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. If you sit back and you let the lemming go, and then you try to do something after the fact, it just generally is not going to happen. Like, I don't know. One of the things that maybe I didn't make really clear is that if you want to do better in this game, it's just about playing better percentages on everything, right? So if you have situations where maybe something might work, but the odds are only 50%, I'm gonna ask myself, is there a better way, right? So I don't know. Personally, I would say if I try to hold a flank when the other, basically everybody else is lemming one way, chances are I'm gonna not do much. I don't know about yours, but generally that's the case. So, I mean, the worst case scenario, if I'm leading the charge, there's a very good chance, I'm going to be able to push through, right? The worst thing that can happen is that, they're going to get to my cap first, okay? But at least I've done a whole bunch of damage. There's a very good chance of that. And in terms of stats, I probably, gotten what I needed from that battle. Whereas if you're going to hold that flank, there's a very good chance you're going to get run down by a lot of tanks, and you're not going to do shit to them, and then you're gonna lose anyways, and then you have done nothing for your stats. So
I got a question, Stump.
Yep.
And you might have covered this. I missed the first few minutes, and I'm sorry I was late. What do you do if you're under tiered, so to speak? Like you're playing a tier 6 medium, say for example a jumbo, and it's a heavily tier 8 fight. I mean, I know you said you need to be in the fight, but how so when you're so under tiered?
Well, if you go to strat session 1 right now, I'm not sure if this was loaded for a certain reason, but this is actually a good map to talk about a lot of things on.
I'm going there now. Give me just a moment. K-Bear or G-Bear?
Sorry, K-Bear. K-Bear.
It's loading up for me.
Well, I mean, as long as you have an idea which map we're talking about.
Okay, it's there.
So, I said something about, being in the fight and going to places on a map where you're not going to be in the fight. Well, on this map, generally, if you're in the field, you're not in the fight. Okay? I mean, again, there may be exceptions, okay? But you got to play the percentages. If you play the percentages, the field, in a lot of cases, is useless, okay? Because the fight is in the town. And if you're in the field, there's a very good chance you're going to get lit up long before you can do anything to anybody, okay? The only way you can really do something out there is they have people who are equally silly out there, and if you happen to be better than them, or if you have people sitting on the edge of town and they just don't pay attention. But those generally are not good odds. So you know, if you're low tier, I still do not suggest you go sit out there, okay? Because you really are not going to be very effective. What I would suggest is to go to a spot where you're not going to be the first one in the fight. Okay? In fact, that's a concept that I believe in generally. Kinson, my good friend there, I think I tell him this every 5 minutes when we were platooning. Okay? I tell him, you got it. Like if you're in a medium or you're in a light, you know, yes, you need to try to spot the enemy, but don't be the first one. You don't have to be the first one to see them. Okay, especially in pubs, because in pubs there's a ton of people who want to take that job. You know, they basically seems like their goal is to get themselves suicide killed. You know, in the first minute of the match. Let them do it. Okay, so. But there are spots where, you know, while you're not in the first one in the fight, but you're still near the fight, okay? And you also have angles, okay? If you do see some people, you know, come in and try to get around. So in the case of this map, let's say if your spawn is on A, okay, I would probably go to you know, F7, okay, F8. Okay, and not expose yourself until you know where everything is, or you see like where the majority of things are. Okay, and then you try to find a way, okay, to get in that fight without them noticing you. So try very hard to like if you ever expose yourself, you don't want them to see you with the front of their tanks. Okay, that's something that you should always try to do anyways if you're in a light or a medium. Okay, you know, it's easier said than done in a lot of cases, but that's the kind of thing you need to try to do. Okay, sometimes, you know, things just don't work out, but you should be trying to do that. Okay, in this map especially, there's actually a lot of great chances to flank. Okay, if you don't have the mobility, for example, you're in the E2, okay, flanking obviously isn't going to be that, you know, that much of an option. So what you should try to do is just wait it out until you see a tank that is damaged, and you try to go and get some shots on them. And you should also look at the map, because even if you're in the low tier, remember there's a very good chance on the other side they're also similar low tiers, and those are the kind of guys that you should focus on. So you sit back, okay, in a fairly safe spot, but not away from the fight. So i.e. not in the field. So you sit back, you watch those tanks pop up, those smaller tanks, and or those lower tier tanks, and then you place yourself in places where now you can engage them. Okay, instead of, you know, putting yourself in a spot and then you see basically now their top tier is near you and you try to engage them. That generally doesn't work out. Okay, you know, also I would say that if you are in pubs and you're trying to carry, this is where something like XVM comes in. You may be in a low tier tank, but let's say if the guy in the higher tier tank in front of you is a 45% player, okay, and you have a certain level of confidence that you can take him, that may not be a bad idea, because, you know, in pubs, if you're trying to carry, even your lower tier, you know, you try to play safe, there's a good chance if you want to win the battle, you're going to have to engage them. Okay, you just don't want to engage them at the very beginning. You want to engage them later on where they're probably a little bit hurt. Okay, if you have the choice. Okay, so it's just a matter of picking your fights. You know, if I'm in an IS6 platoon with two other guys in IS6, and you know, we're top tier, I probably, you know, not trying to figure out, you know, where everybody is. I'm probably going to go to a spot where I know the fight's going to be, and I'm going to go there and try to kick their ass. But if I'm in, you know, that E2, and, you know, in that same tier 8 fight, chances are I'm going to sit back a bit to see where everything is. Okay, and then try to play it as smart as I can, and you know, go to a place where I have some chance. You know, the reality is when you're low tier, your chance of winning significantly goes down. Okay, but equally, In this game, I would say in the
Hey, Stump, can I just pause you
Yep.
for a second? Whoever's drawing on the map, knock it off. This is being recorded, please. And erase that if you could. Click select, and then the undo button should be in the upper right.
Okay. Where was I?
Something about lower tier.
Yeah. So basically, if you're in a lower tier, just gotta try to play as smart as you can, you know. But I would say in most cases, you generally have, in the long run, you have more chance of being a top tier than you do in the lower tier, right? So, you know, if you have the ability to pull, let's say 50% of your fights when you're in low tier, and you can carry, let's say, you know, 70% of your fights when you're top tier, there's a very good chance you're probably your win rate will be over 60%. So because, you know, in the long run, especially if you're playing tanks like IS6s, you know, you're gonna have a lot more battles where you're the big dog. So, yeah, and you do some platooning, for sure.
You said definitely don't be afraid to, you know, fling gold rounds, right?
Correct. You know, not everybody has a premium account, but you know, if you can afford to shoot them, shoot them.
Will do.
I mean, the credits and all that stuff is good, but you know what? It's not real money. I mean, sure, you may have to put in real money, but you know, once the thing is in there, it's meant to be used. I mean, hoarding it is not, whatever. I mean, you can buy stuff with it, but you know, if you buy a tank and you can't do well in it, to me, it doesn't. I don't see the point. So, in fact, I'm sitting on about 26 million credits, and I'm not really in a rush to buy any tanks. So basically, I just told myself, I'm gonna fling gold.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Stock tanks, I'm assuming, I mean, because you're at a major disadvantage when you first get them, do you just free XP the modules so you don't have to deal with them stock?
Hey Jack, are you there?
Yeah, exactly.
Can you tell these guys? Do I play stock tanks?
Yes, he do, but I don't do. When I'm buying a new tank, most of the time, I buy all the modules with free XP. So my tank is at his best from the start, but Stump is not doing that. Maybe sometimes he might buy some modules, but most of the time he starts stuck.
I don't recommend it, but you know, sometimes I like a little bit of pain. Or challenge.
It just makes more sense to grind out your fully stocked tank for all the XP for the next tank and spend your free XP on the modules. You know, I mean, it just makes more sense.
Can I make an observation? When I was grinding up the Russian heavy line, or not Russian, Chinese heavy line, I was at the 110, and just because I knew I was going to free XP a good portion of it, I didn't bother to research the stuff like the radio, because the next one was the next tier up and you get it for free once you research the next tank. I found out that by doing that, I tended to get preferential tiering. Like I was more in tier 8 matches all the time, just by not upgrading something that really didn't matter, like the radio. So that might affect things, but it's not always guaranteed to do that.
Like I said, I don't recommend it. There's no, as far as you know, stats and you know, for your mental state, it does nothing for you. Okay, I don't recommend it. But personally, I take it as a challenge, and in my opinion, it sharpens my skill. But you know, I don't recommend it because I think, you know, you might get really bad results, and I don't want you to come tell me I'm an idiot, because I probably am.
I've got another question if no one else does.
Go ahead.
Sorry, my little girl got me there. Son of a gun.
Well, if before Baron gets his question in, one thing I'll say, if this is for some people who I think wanted to talk to me and ask some questions about playing mediums. I actually I don't think that I'm that good of a medium player. I think I'm actually a better slow heavy player. But that being said, I think I'm okay at mediums. So as far as recommendation on how to play them, I don't think they're really that different from heavies in a lot of ways. The only thing you just have to be careful of is that you're more fragile. So try not to be the first one to get smacked, and always try to find a better way to approach the enemy than frontally. In a lot of cases, there is. One trick that I always use is try to wait for somebody else to get near and see if the enemies focus on them, because a lot of times if you stay stationary and somebody else is moving near them, they get nervous, so they will focus on the guy that's moving. So if you see somebody else near you on your side and they're moving, there's a good chance if you give it some time, the guy that you want to engage is going to turn his turret. And once he gets distracted, that's where you can go in and surprise him. And then, whether you stay there and duke it out or not, it depends on the tank you have and the tank that they have. A lot of times it's probably a better idea to get out and try to get back in again. I have a tendency to slug it out at first, and if I get to a point where I'm kind of weakened, then I become a lot more cautious and start to basically back off and find those flanking opportunities a lot more than at the very beginning. So I'm not one to be very miserly on my hit points. I use them liberally, but at the same time I always try to get something in return when I use them. So I think that's really the big thing as far as playing mediums. I play them very aggressively, but it's just that I try very hard not to be the first one to get smacked. I wish my buddy Kenson would understand that, so I don't have to keep saying it to him every 5 minutes. Baron, you back?
Yes, sir. Sorry, my little girl pulled me away. I meant to ask, encounter battles, assault battles, and standard battles, do you have those turned on? Because it seems to me like you don't have as much control, so to speak. Just curious about your personal preference on that.
I turn off assault.
Okay, but you leave encounters on?
Yep, I have no problem with encounters. In fact, I would say encounters is actually a good way of upping your win 7.
Can I ask a question about encounter battles, particularly like Himmelsdorf or something along those lines?
Mm-hmm.
I always try to take the hill in Himmelsdorf, and I heard you say earlier, to follow the lemming train, so to speak, to try and make it like a good push as opposed to just a bunch of people rushing off to die. If the hill is ignored and the lemmings, so to speak, aren't capping, what do you do in that particular situation if it were you personally?
You mean if the enemy is capping and your guys are not?
No, example. I had a match in it today. Actually, it was in my jumbo again. My team chose not to engage on the hill, and they also didn't head towards the cap. They all just kind of went to the middle. So I mean, I was kind of like, okay, I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure if I need to rush off to the cap or sit here and try to defend the hill. So I tried to defend the hill, and that ended poorly.
Most important thing is don't die.
Right.
I say this to my platoon mates all the time. Even if they say, "Wow, this shit is happening," and it's like a recording. I just play it back, keep telling them, "Don't die, don't die," because if you don't die, you at least have a chance to do something. Okay. I would, there's a lot of times, if that happens, you're not going to get the win. That's just the reality, right? But, this conversation is, I guess a lot of it is about stats, right? So if you're not going to win all your games, but what you can try to do is make sure even in your losses, you maximize what you do in your stats, because that's how you improve them. So if you're thinking along those lines, getting yourself killed, rushing up there, facing 10 tanks, you're not going to do anything because they'll probably focus you down, in less than one reload, really. And, so, the way I play it generally is I cover their routes down to the cap, because if they're up there, they can't win. They're going to have to come down, right? Find a safe spot where you can cover their route down, okay? But also find a spot where you can move, okay? Don't just sit there and try to duke it out with them, because again, the chances are they're going to have a whole bunch of tanks. You may be able to count on your guys if they happen to be in those good spots, watching them come down. But if they're not, then you can't rely on them. So just simply, find a good spot that can cover, and then get as much shots in as you can, and move on to the next spot. Okay, and just try to maximize what you can do damage wise, and that's probably the most you can do, right? And then basically keep backing up until you get to a point where you have some shots on cap, and try to get some cap points. Okay, a lot of times it's not going to work out, but I've done it where it worked out beautifully. Okay, because what I've done in the past is, let's say if those teammates are in a spot where they're going to end up being engaged by the enemy when they're coming down, you go find a spot where they don't expect, okay, that's slightly out of the way, okay, not completely out of the way, again, you have to get in the fight, but slightly out of the way, and then you wait until they get into engagement with your team, and then you go and hit them from behind. They don't expect you, but they're just completely busy with your enemy. And depending on the tank you have and the gun you have, you may be able to get the fight in your favor, right? But generally speaking, again, you should play the odds. So that's why I always go up the hill. Okay, I always go up the hill, because I would say 9 out of 10 times the hill will win, right? So there's no point in doing anything else. Okay, the only time when I don't is basically I'm going up the hill, and then I look around and I'm the only one, and a lot of times that's when I turn around and say, screw that.
Thank you.
No problem.
Are you going to post up, like when you said, I heard you said you're going to a training room here soon, or are you going to
probably not tonight. I mean, it's getting kind of late. Usually I'm done the latest by 11, so but in the future I'll definitely schedule one, probably one where a lot more people are available and not in clan rooms.
I think you covered pretty much everything I had to ask. I really appreciate your time and trying to teach us some stuff here. Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? Any more questions? Have I put all you guys to sleep?
No, not at all.
Nope. I'll throw a little tidbit in based on your encounter specific on Himmelsdorf. In general, with encounters, because capping takes 3 times longer to do than a standard battle, going for a cap, unless you have the other team completely pinched somewhere overall, is usually not going to win a match. All you're really doing is putting yourself in a barrel to get shot at by the enemy. My recommendation on that, especially when you're trying to improve your stats, is to focus more on where on the map can you bottleneck their spawn to the cap, or their spawn towards your spawn, kill tanks. Just make that your focus, and it will make a tremendous difference in how you play that game. You will see rewards for it.
Yes, sir.
The only exception I would say is Redshire. Redshire is the way it's laid out. If if you have people in certain tanks on the other side, and you're in a really tough heavy, and if you believe in your own abilities, there's actually some interesting things that you can do on cap. So that's one. Also depends on your route there. If you can get there safely, but a lot of times I actually do go cap on that one, especially when I'm in something like SD1. That thing could be quite interesting there. All right, so I guess that's it.
Well, thank you again, Stump. If you could just put something on the forums when you're planning on doing a training room, I'll be there.
Will do.
Thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you.